In February 2021, winter storms descended on Texas, causing more than 4.5 million homes and businesses to be without power. Here in Michigan, we're used to winter, right? We're used to snowstorms. We've got plows, we've got winter tires. We've sort of figured it out for the most part. Maybe we haven't figured out potholes, but we have figured out snow for the most part. But a lot of the people, businesses in Texas, were unable to get to work. Now, in the last year, with working with COVID, that's not a big deal. Most of us can work remotely. But imagine if your business was without power for 7 to 10 days. Would your business be able to operate? If your servers and your systems and everything were on battery backups, that may have lasted for a half hour or an hour, but it's unlikely that you would still be able to operate after a few days, even if you had a generator. Businesses that had moved their infrastructure to the cloud were likely able to continue to function. Their employees could work remotely, assuming that they had an internet connection, and their business was able to continue to function. Obviously, probably not at 100%, because obviously your employees are dealing with power and frozen pipes and other issues like that. And so today we're going to talk about what is the cloud, what are some reasons that we would want to be in the cloud, what is Azure. We hear a lot of these marketing terms. So I'm David Steenwyk, I'm the president of Macatawa Technologies, and I'm joined here by Andrew Kraker. Andrew is our lead solution engineer. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about a few different things here. We've heard these marketing terms through the years, the cloud, Azure, things like that. A lot of our clients or might not know, or prospect clients, if you're watching this video, you might not know what is the cloud, what is Azure, and so we're going to talk about that today. So real quick, Andrew, what is Azure? What is the cloud?
So Azure is a part of Microsoft's cloud. And the cloud can be anything from a software as a service like SharePoint, or a lot of you might have Microsoft 365 for email. That's considered a software as a service in the cloud. More specifically, Azure is Microsoft's platform as a service. So you can spin up servers, server operating systems, just like the servers that you might be running at your business right now. And they run it in data centers that are spread out across the world to give them redundancy in case one of the data centers fails. Their data is somewhere else.
So the cloud, the way I like to think of it, right? The cloud just means somebody's server somewhere else, right? It's not your server in your room or your basement. The cloud simply means somebody else's servers somewhere else, right? Whereas Azure is specifically Microsoft's servers somewhere else, running their servers with as a service, right? Is that a good way to summarize it?
That's a good way to put it. Yes, they have data centers that are much more impressive looking than even some of our best clients' data rooms. So they got redundancy built in. But yes, they are running servers, and they provide services or a platform to us as a service.
So the cloud, somebody else's server somewhere else, you don't own it, you pay a monthly service fee. Azure happens to be one of those services that's in the cloud. Why would I want it? Okay, so if I'm a small business, so Macatawa Technologies works with companies that typically have 125 and fewer employees, maybe 150 and fewer employees. If I was in that range, why would I want to go to Azure or the cloud?
Well, there's several reasons. Each company is different. We want to analyze your needs and determine what parts of your infrastructure can be moved to the cloud. But one benefit is it's able to be scaled. If you need another server, and you're running an on-premise server, like another virtual machine, you might need to add more RAM, physically add hardware, storage. When you're talking about spinning up a new virtual machine in the cloud, they have those resources readily available. I can spin up a new server in minutes, if not seconds.
Yeah, so it's great, right? If you're a growing business and you need to scale, I mean, on the one hand, you'd say, well, gee, Andrew, couldn't I just pay you to sell me a new server? Yeah, of course you could, but it's a whole lot easier to do a handful of clicks on the computer than it is to place an order with Dell and procure the parts and wait a week or two or a month, depending. So it can be a lot quicker. Also, one thing that's really nice about the cloud is we all think about wanting to grow our businesses up, but in the last year, a lot of people experienced their businesses going in the opposite direction, which is down. We don't always think of that as business owners. We're always thinking of how to grow and expand. But in the last year, businesses that had to scale back, they could do that. Whereas if you purchased all that infrastructure, suddenly it's just running whether you need it or not. So the ability to scale up and down. The next feature here, or the next reason you'd want to go to Azure or the cloud, would be flexibility, right? Kind of playing off of that, the ability to scale.
Yeah, we kind of tie the Azure services to another product that we use that helps us scale the environment as needed. So if you're only working 9 to 5 or different hours, you can have your server just run for those times, and you're only paying for the resources you use during those times. You don't have to pay for it while it's off. I mean, the pricing structure is a little more complicated than that, but that's the general, the the short of it, I guess.
So the next reason you'd want to go to Azure in the cloud would be the technology, right? So even our clients who have considerably larger budgets for servers and SANs and things like that, it is only a fraction of what Microsoft is able to put into their data centers. And so, for instance, some of our clients might, look at buying a server and think that, spending $5,000 is a lot. And on the one hand, for some businesses, that is a lot of money. But it's nothing compared to what Microsoft can invest behind the scenes.
Right. And you can kind of pick and choose when you build a server. Do you want it to have high performance solid state drives or just regular platter drives? You really build what works for you. As I mentioned before, they have redundancy that far surpasses anything that we might have. Usually these Azure and other cloud providers are talking about 5 nines uptime, which means they're up 99.999% of the time, which I think equals probably I think it's like a few minutes of downtime per year.
More than what you're going to get out of having a server in the basement.
Correct.
Another reason would be not having to manage the hardware, right? Even though we're IT professionals and we're really proficient at managing servers, it's another reason, right? I mean, we don't work for free, right, Andrew? And it takes us time and tools and energy to manage it. And so that's one more thing that you can kind of outsource. And your cloud provider is responsible to make sure everything works. Obviously, you still need IT professionals like us to kind of configure things and work with it. But that's one more reason to sort of to get that off your plate. What about reliability?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, downtime is a lot lower. You might have a year where you're like, wow, we don't have any power outages this year, but you'll probably make up for it the next year. You can ask Texas about that. And it's just, and they got data centers spread throughout the world. I mean, we would just use the ones in the United States. So even if they did have a data center in Texas, if you move or if you copy your data between two data centers, if that's important for you to have that amount of uptime, then you could just continue working on the other data center.
Yeah, reliability is a huge reason, right? A lot of companies start small and then they grow. And so when they're small, do we want to have reliable access to our data? Well, of course we do. But do we want to pay for it? Well, I mean, we're trying to stay in business and trying to grow and everything. And so reliability is important, but, growth is more important than saving money. But eventually, a lot of companies get to the point where that's not an option. And so if you're looking for the most reliability, Azure has been a very reliable service. All right. And so the last reason to switch to Azure, one of the last reasons would be
less reliance on having a well-performing device. So you're typically trying to keep
What kind of
your
device? Like my phone, my server,
like
my what do
like
you
your laptop.
laptops?
Yeah. So I mean, usually when we buy someone's workstation, we determine what they need based on the programs they're going to use. So if they're using CAD or if they're just using Office, we would build it based on how much RAM they need, if they need a video card, something like that. In a virtual desktop type infrastructure, which is one of many things you can do in Azure, um, you can spin up servers that you connect to that have graphics processing enabled. So your end users that are power users that need to access CAD or video editing or something like that can do so on the lowest level Chromebook because they're just remoting into a server that has that power. So you don't have to spend your money on an expensive workstation for your end users.
Okay, so really quick, just to recap, the reasons you'd want to switch to the Azure or the cloud. Number one, it's easier to scale. Number two, it's flexible. Number three, the technology behind it is way more than what you could likely afford on your own. Number four would be you don't have to worry about managing it, right? You don't physically own that anymore, and that's on Microsoft. Fifth reason would be reliability, and that's really one of the biggest reasons people do it. And the last one would be you can virtualize desktops and get away with having cheaper endpoints like laptops and desktops, et cetera. So, what about reasons why you would not want to switch to Azure or the cloud?
Yeah. First one is you're for most people the cost does go up. You're
Really? Because
getting
it seems like all the marketing says it's cheaper.
well, for some people it may be cheaper. You just kind of have to go case by case with that. Depends on what you use it for. The value of switching isn't always right in front of your face. Like you said earlier, the hardware failures and stuff like that you deal with on premise, you may not be considering that in your calculations of how expensive it is. So
Right. So, in terms of it's hard to do a true apples to apples comparison, right? Because what the cloud's going to give you in terms of reliability and scalability, it's hard to do a true apples to apples. But a lot of our clients will sort of price out, okay, well, what does it cost if I were to replace my infrastructure with something new? Maybe it's been 5 years versus if I were to go to Azure. And most of the time, we have found that for the majority of our clients, it is more expensive. But again, you are getting more for it, so there is a reason. So the next reason that you wouldn't want to go with Azure or the cloud would be loss of control, right? So I've actually had people say to me, I like my server being in the basement with the spiders because I can go down there and if there's a problem, I can see where my data is. And on top of that, if I have a problem, I know you guys will take care of it. Whereas Andrew, when we move it to Azure, we're kind of at the mercy of the Microsoft engineers, right? I mean, we can't drive out to these different data centers and physically repair these things, or it's all remote things like that. So we're sort of at the mercy of Microsoft there.
yeah, and we are and kind of at the mercy of their security as well. They're housing your data and their firewalls. It's all behind their stuff. So you're putting a lot of trust in them. And yeah, I could see how it might be hard to let go of that control for sure.
Yeah. Another reason people consider not going to the cloud or the Azure is the dynamic pricing, right? If you've ever gone to the Azure pricing calculator, it's a little confusing. And there's so many different things of hard drive types and memory and RAM and processors and types of hard drives and failover. And it gets complicated, right? And on top of that, these are estimates for some of these things based on how much your use is going to be. So getting a firm handle on it, exactly like when you buy a server from us and we're a Dell partner, we give you a price, and as long as Dell honors that and they have it in stock when we order it, that's the price. It's not quite the same way with Azure.
Yeah, you definitely lose some predictability there. You kind of have to just run what you need, and you get a good average of how much it's going to cost. It's really hard to nail down how much you're going to pay given a certain infrastructure and schedule.
Yeah, so it can be a little bit more of a challenge with building a budget. And then the last reason to not switch to Azure or the cloud would be if you go full cloud, right? Like some of our clients have said to us, guys, we don't want anything anymore in here. We want a router, an access point, and a modem, and that's it. Um, and so if you get rid of everything, what do you lose?
Yeah, when people think of going cloud, they're like, yeah, we don't want a server sitting here anymore. It's too noisy or something. But if you get rid of your server completely, as of right now, you may lose some of the granular control that you have with your on-premise from Active Directory. So if you have a domain structure right now at your office, we use group policies to control certain parts of your computer, certain permissions. We just have a ton of granular control over that. And as of right now, in order to do that, you can do a hybrid cloud, and you would need a server at your office. If you went full cloud and you didn't want a server, you would lose that control.
So a lot of our clients too, and the question is, does it really matter, right? I mean, there are some things that you can do for controlling computers and things within Azure that, frankly, some small businesses is probably good enough. Depending on the size of your organization, some of our clients who are on the smaller side might look at a domain controller and group policy and everything else, Andrew, and say, my goodness, we have 5 employees or 10 employees. This is overkill, right? Like, we're trying to stay in business, we're trying to grow. We pretty much have to trust everybody. And so, if you're on the really smaller side of businesses, it's not always, that important, I guess I would say, or that high of a priority. It's important, right? But it might not be the highest priority. So a lot of our clients who are on that smaller side, it can be a little bit of a challenge trying to get them to understand why, permissions and users and things like that is important. A few of the questions, right? So some questions that we'll get sometimes. Office 365 is no longer Office 365. Okay, it's called Microsoft 365. So is Microsoft 365, is that part of Azure? Is that part of the cloud? Like, where does that fit in? We haven't even talked about Microsoft 365 yet.
Right. And yes, I still slip up and call it Office 365.
We should start implementing push-ups. So anybody here who calls it Office 365 has to do 5 push-ups or something. Oh, we're IT guys, maybe 1 push-up.
You got to give it a good year or so after the change before you.
I think it's been a year, hasn't it? Anyway, sorry. So is Microsoft 365, is that Azure? Is that cloud? Like, for people who don't know, what is that?
So Microsoft 365, typically when you think about that, people are thinking of their email or SharePoint or some of those other services, and that's what we call software as a service. So it is still cloud. It's cloud in the sense that used to be you would have an Exchange server running on premise doing your email, and now you have Microsoft 365 Exchange. So it's not technically the same as Azure. Azure is more of the platform as a service when we're running servers in the cloud. It's user management. They all kind of intertwine and intermingle as the Microsoft as a whole.
So Microsoft 365 is a cloud service, but it's not necessarily a part of Azure. And you can do Azure without Microsoft 365, and you can do Microsoft 365 without Azure, right?
Yes.
Next question we get is SharePoint. Is SharePoint part of Azure?
Yeah, so SharePoint's same boat as Microsoft 365 Exchange. It is a software as a service, which is generally used for storing files. So it's not Azure, but it does tie into Azure in terms of Azure manages users, and users have permission to SharePoint. So
Okay, so if I were to go to Azure do I still need to think about backups, right? Like, or do I need a business continuity or disaster recovery plan? Because I'm paying Microsoft, right? They just need to worry about this now.
Right. Yeah. So you still need backups. Your data is still on a device in Azure. They have different data centers. Within their data centers, they have local redundant buildings. So you can choose to add local redundancy, and then you can choose to add geo redundancy. Um, so if you don't have backups and you don't have redundancy set up in Azure, and one of their buildings happens to lose power, then or their hard drive on the server that you're running on crashes, then you're kind of out of luck. So you still need backups, you still need redundancy in order to perform disaster recovery.
So the answer is yes, you still need to think
Right.
about backups and disaster recovery.
Yes.
So what about, this is something that keeps me awake at night, security. So if I go to Azure, is it more secure than having my own servers, or is it less secure, or do I even have to worry about security now? Because Microsoft is huge, right?
Well, you'll get conflicting views on that. And I think um, we've had our share of cloud services getting hacked and losing data, and you've seen it in the news. And we've had our share of local servers, even just last week with Exchange servers and Hafnium exploit. Um, that, I mean, you kind of, I would say you probably have similar risk if you're patching everything and keeping up to date at your office on your own servers, then obviously your risk goes down. But I'd say that's a toss up.
So the short answer is that it is secure, right? I mean, Microsoft spends a huge amount of money on security. They do not want to have a breach, but you still need to think about security, right? Security is not just Azure or a tool that you can buy. It's a mindset, it's a process, it's different layers, et cetera. Into the next question. So, am I more likely to get hacked or have a problem if I, do it myself by having my own infrastructure, or am I more likely to get hacked by putting all my eggs in the giant basket of Microsoft?
It's a bigger attack target for sure for countries like Russia that are always trying to find a way to get data and sell data and cause chaos. If over 50% of people are using Microsoft 365 for email, that makes it a bigger attack target. So um, I wouldn't say you're more likely one way or the other. Again, that comes down to how good you are at patching your system, or how good your managed service provider is at patching your system.
Yeah, keeping those updates, right? If you do have your own infrastructure, you've got to stay up to date. We just did a video on security and everything. So if you have additional questions around security, be sure to check that video out. Another one of the questions, or maybe not so much a question as a concern, Andrew, is around trust, right? We've talked about this a little bit already, but people have this concern because, okay, right now my data, right? Like my data is very important to me, and I know it's in a database or it's in a server, and I can see that server. You put it into the cloud, you go to Azure. Suddenly, you don't really know where it is. You can't really go and see it. And you don't know the employees who are working on it. Microsoft is a massive corporation, right? I mean, they're one of the biggest players when it comes to the cloud. And so we have to trust that they have the policies and the procedures and the layers of security and everything else implemented to keep your data safe and secure. And frankly, I do trust them. I mean, it is a releasing of control, right? I mean, frankly, even our clients have to trust us. We have our policies, we have our procedures, background checks, everything else. But whether you're working with an MSP like Macatawa Technologies or a cloud provider like Microsoft, there is a certain level of trust. And I get it that when you can meet us in person, and once COVID's gone, we can shake hands and look in the eye again without a mask on. But, there is a certain level of trust when there's, somebody local.
Yeah.
What about the question here of, okay, so I go to the cloud, I'm on Azure, do I even need a server anymore?
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit earlier, but it depends on the use case. Everybody's going to be different. If you want to maintain Active Directory, group policies, if that's a big thing to have that granular control, then you still might need a server on site. It might not look like a big rack mount server creating all kinds of noise in the room. It could just be a small server, just a little tower server or something. But if you don't need that, if you've never been on a domain, and the services you need in Azure don't require anything to be on premise, then yeah, you don't need a server at your office. You can put your files on SharePoint, your email, and Microsoft 365 Exchange, and control end user devices using Intune or our RMM software.
Okay, so it really kind of comes down to that last, because the last little bit of, again, Microsoft has made good strides, but if you really need that level of control, maintaining control on your users and everything, probably still going to need something on site, at least for now. And so in conclusion here today, Andrew, so this is a lot of information, right? People are still confused about what's the cloud and what's Azure and what do I need and everything. So hopefully this has been enlightening if you've been watching, but this is a lot of information. So Andrew, Dave, tell me, what should I do? Should I go to Azure? Should I stay on local infrastructure? How would you answer that, Andrew?
Yeah, it's going to be get a hold of us. Tell us what you have, what you want to accomplish. We come up with a different scenario for everybody. There's no cookie cutter deployment when it comes to Azure. You might need an Azure virtual machine running a QuickBooks server. You might need a Windows virtual desktop infrastructure. You might just need SharePoint and email. We just have to take a look at your needs and customize something that would work for you.
Great. So in summary today, here to kind of quickly recap. So what is Azure? It is a Microsoft services in the cloud. The cloud just means somebody's servers somewhere else. Some of the reasons that you'd want to switch to Azure or the cloud: scalability, flexibility, access to way more technology and redundancy than you could purchase on your own, offloading the management of the hardware, reliability. That's a huge one, right? Reliability in the cloud. And then also the last one would be virtualized desktops. So being able to get away with lower performing or less expensive computers, laptops, et cetera. Reasons that you might not want to switch to Azure or the cloud would be typically it's a higher cost. You do lose a certain level of control. The pricing can be a bit dynamic or hard to nail down exactly, especially right away. And if you go full cloud where you don't have any server in your office, you will lose some control and functionality specifically around kind of controlling your end users. So, Andrew, unless there's anything else that you have to add today?
That's all.
All right. Well, thanks for your time and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us.